It all started a few years ago when I met Emma. I was 24, working my first real job in a new city, and she was a 22-year-old nursing student with a laugh that could light up a room. We met at a friend's barbecue, one of those laid-back gatherings where you end up talking to strangers for hours over cheap beer and burgers. I don't know what drew me to her first. Maybe the way she could make anyone around her laugh, or how she had this habit of scrunching her nose when she was concentrating. Whatever it was, I was hooked almost instantly. We started dating soon after. At first, it was the kind of love that felt easy. We spent entire weekends together binge-watching TV shows, exploring the city, and cooking meals that usually turned out to be disasters. She'd dance around the kitchen while I pretended to know how to chop onions properly, and I'd think to myself how lucky I was to have found someone like her. She had this energy, this lightness, that made everything seem a little brighter. For the first 2 years, things were great. Sure, we had our fights, mostly about small, stupid stuff like whose turn it was to clean or why she always left her socks under the couch. But we always made up quickly. She moved into my apartment after a year, and while it was a small place, it felt like home because we were together. But then, gradually, things started to change. At first, it was subtle, almost so subtle that I didn't notice it. She started coming home later from her clinical shifts, saying she needed to unwind with her classmates after stressful days. I didn't think much of it. Nursing school sounded brutal, and she deserved to blow off some steam. But then it became more frequent. Her texts would come slower, sometimes hours apart, and when she was home, she'd be glued to her phone, smiling at messages I couldn't see. I chalked it up to stress or being overwhelmed with her workload, but the distance between us kept growing. She started spending more time out with her friends, people I'd never met, and less time with me. On the nights she was home, she'd claim exhaustion, barely looking up from her phone before retreating to bed. I told myself it was just a phase, that relationships go through ups and downs, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, I decided to surprise her. She'd mentioned she was studying late with a friend, so I thought I'd bring her coffee and some snacks to help her power through. I texted her before leaving, but she didn't respond. When I got to the library she'd said she'd be at, I couldn't find her. I checked every floor, walking up and down the aisles of desks and study rooms, but there was no sign of her. I even texted again, saying I was there, but she still didn't reply. By the time I got home, she was already there, sitting on the couch in her pajamas. She looked up when I walked in, her face immediately shifting to a forced smile. "Hey, you're home late," she said casually, like she hadn't just ignored my text for hours. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I told you, I was studying. At the library, right? Because I went there." "You weren't there, Emma." Her face froze for a second, but then she quickly recovered, rolling her eyes like I was the crazy one. "I left early. It was too crowded, and I came home to study here." It didn't make sense. The timing didn't add up, and I could feel my chest tighten with a mix of confusion and suspicion. But I didn't want to accuse her of lying, not without proof. So, I just nodded, pretending to believe her. "Okay," I said, walking past her to the kitchen. That night, I barely slept. I kept going over everything in my head. Her vague excuses, the missed texts, the fact that she'd been acting distant for months. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that she was just busy, stressed, or tired. But deep down, I felt like something else was going on, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the truth. The doubt didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger with every little thing I noticed but didn't want to confront. Emma kept coming home late, sometimes smelling like a perfume I knew wasn't hers. She was glued to her phone more than ever, always quick to turn the screen away when I walked into the room. And yet, every time I brought up how distant she'd been, she'd dismiss it. "You're overthinking," she'd say with a laugh, ruffling my hair like I was being a silly kid. "I'm just busy, that's all. Nursing school is intense, you know that." She wasn't wrong. Her schedule was brutal, but that excuse only worked for so long. One night, I caught her smiling at her phone, a kind of smile she hadn't given me in months. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "No one," she said quickly, locking the screen and putting the phone face down on the coffee table. The tension in the room was suffocating. I wanted to press her, to demand answers, but instead, I just sat there, staring at the TV without actually watching it. My mind was spinning. Who was she texting? Why did she feel the need to hide it? And why couldn't she look at me the way she looked at her phone? A few days later, I decided I couldn't keep living in this fog of uncertainty. I had to know. I hated the idea of snooping, but I couldn't stop myself. Late one night, after Emma had gone to bed, I picked up her phone from the coffee table. She always used the same passcode, and my stomach churned as I typed it in. Her messages were filled with the usual chatter from her classmates and friends, but one name stood out, Nate. I scrolled through their conversation, my heart sinking with every word. Nate wasn't just some classmate. Their messages were flirtatious, playful, too playful. He was asking her how her day was, telling her she looked amazing in a photo she'd sent. She'd responded with a selfie of her smiling, hair messy from her shift, but still beautiful in that effortless way that used to take my breath away. My chest tightened as I kept reading. They'd made plans to meet up at least 3 times in the last month. Once at a coffee shop, once at a bar, and once at his apartment. I put the phone down like it had burned me, my hands trembling. My stomach felt like it was tied in knots, and I could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. Was I overreacting? They hadn't explicitly said anything about being together, but the tone of their messages left little room for doubt. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when everything had started to fall apart. Was it my fault? Had I been too distant? Too focused on work? Or had she just grown bored of me? The next morning, I couldn't pretend everything was normal anymore. Over breakfast, I finally said it. Emma, are you seeing someone else? Her head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. What? No. Why would you even ask that? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I saw your messages with Nate. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky sigh. It's not what you think, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then tell me what it is, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at her plate, tracing circles in her oatmeal with her spoon. We've just been talking, she said finally. That's all. He's a friend. A friend? I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. Friends don't send each other flirty texts and make plans to meet up at their apartments, Emma. Her eyes snapped up to mine, tears welling up in them. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice breaking. It's just, you've been so distant lately, and I've been stressed, and he was there. He listened. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. I've been working my ass off to support us while you're in school, and you're saying I pushed you into someone else's arms? I'm not saying that, she said quickly, wiping at her eyes. I'm just saying, I don't know. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. This was the woman I'd loved, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. And now she was sitting across from me, admitting that she'd let someone else into the space that was supposed to be ours. I can't do this, I said, standing up from the table. I need some air. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, not even sure where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't be in that apartment, couldn't sit there and look at her and pretend we could come back from this. Because deep down, I wasn't sure if we could. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring past me as I tried to make sense of everything. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my mind replayed the conversation with Emma over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. I didn't mean for it to happen. What the hell did that even mean? Did she think it justifies everything? That it somehow makes the betrayal less real? Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. It wasn't anything special, just a small, quiet place I'd passed a million times but never thought to stop at. Tonight, though, I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed to sit somewhere, anywhere, and try to piece myself together. The waitress brought me a coffee, and I stared into the cup for a long time before taking a sip. The warmth felt grounding, but my thoughts were still racing. I kept asking myself the same questions. When did this start? Was I blind the whole time? Or had I just been too afraid to see it? The worst part was the doubt. Even after everything, a small part of me still wanted to believe her, to believe that it really wasn't as bad as it seemed, that maybe there was some way to salvage what we had. But every time I tried to convince myself, I'd think about those messages with Nate and feel that sick, hollow ache in my chest all over again. I stayed at the diner until the sun started creeping over the horizon. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, asked if I wanted anything else, but I just shook my head and paid my bill. As I stepped outside into the cool morning air, I realized I couldn't avoid going back to the apartment forever. Eventually, I'd have to face Emma again, and the thought made my stomach churn. When I got home, the place was quiet. Emma was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red and puffy. She must have been crying while I was gone. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Guilt for leaving her like that, for not letting her explain herself further. But then I remembered why I'd left in the first place, and the guilt was quickly replaced by anger. She looked up as I walked in, her voice soft and tentative. "You didn't come home last night." I was worried. I didn't respond right away. I took off my jacket, tossed it onto the chair, and stood there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. Finally, I said, "I needed time to think." She nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. "I get it. I don't blame you." I sat down across from her, keeping a safe distance between us. "Emma, I need you to be honest with me. How far did it go with Nate?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she shook her head. "It didn't. We didn't. I never slept with him, if that's what you're asking." "That's not the only way you can betray someone, you know," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Emotional cheating is just as bad. Maybe worse." "I know," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know I messed up, okay? I was stupid, and I let things go too far, but I swear, I didn't mean to hurt you." I rubbed my temples, trying to push back the headache that was building. "You keep saying that you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. And you knew what you were doing, Emma. You knew it wasn't right, but you kept doing it anyway. Why?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I guess. I don't know. I felt like I was losing you. You were always working, always distracted, and I felt invisible. Nate noticed me. He made me feel, I don't know, wanted." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. "So what? I didn't make you feel wanted? Is that it?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "That's not what I mean. You've always been good to me, better than I deserve. But I guess I was selfish. I wanted more attention, more something. And instead of talking to you about it, I went looking for it somewhere else." Her honesty was brutal, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to yell, to demand how she could do this to me when I'd done everything I could to support her. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted and broken, just wanted it all to stop. "I don't know if I can forgive this," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know if I want to." Her head snapped up, and I saw panic flash across her face. "Please don't say that. I know I screwed up, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." "You already lost me," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. "You lost me the moment you chose someone else over us." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. And as much as I hated seeing her like that, I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I'd spent so long putting her needs first, bending over backward to make her happy, and this was how she'd repaid me. I couldn't do it anymore. I wouldn't. After a while, her sobs quieted, and she looked up at me with swollen, tear-streaked eyes. "What happens now?" I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of her question settle on my shoulders. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we need some time apart." "I need some time apart?" She nodded slowly, her face crumpling with fresh tears. "Okay, I'll pack some things and stay with a friend for now." I didn't say anything as she got up and walked to the bedroom. I just sat there, staring at the coffee table, feeling completely drained. This wasn't how I thought our story would end, but maybe it was the ending we needed. Emma left that same day. She packed a suitcase quietly, avoiding eye contact as she moved around the apartment. I sat on the couch, unable to bring myself to help or even say much. It was like watching a stranger in my home, someone I didn't recognize anymore. When she was ready to go, she stood near the door for a moment, suitcase in hand, like she was waiting for me to stop her. But I didn't. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't look at her. "Yeah, me too." And then she was gone. For the first few days, the apartment felt like a tomb. Her presence lingered in all the small things she hadn't taken. The mismatched mug she loved, her shampoo in the shower, a half-finished novel on the nightstand. It felt like she might walk back in at any moment, smiling like nothing had happened. But I knew better. She wasn't coming back, not in the way that mattered. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into work and anything else that would keep my mind from wandering back to her. I went to the gym more, stayed late at the office, and even joined a friend for a trivia night at a bar I didn't particularly like. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the memories. They crept in during quiet moments, like when I was lying in bed or driving home from work. I thought about the good times, how she used to leave me little notes in my lunch bag, or how she'd dance around the kitchen in her socks, singing off-key just to make me laugh. But those memories were always followed by the bad ones. The late-night texts, the lies, the way she'd smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. It was like a loop I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. A couple of weeks later, I ran into Megan, one of Emma's old friends, at the grocery store. Megan and I had always been friendly, but we weren't close. She looked surprised to see me, and after a bit of small talk, she hesitated before saying, "I heard about you and Emma." "I'm sorry. That sucks." "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She shifted awkwardly, like she wanted to say more but wasn't sure if she should. Finally, she added, "For what it's worth, I think you deserved better." Her words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Megan hesitated again, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "Look, I'm not trying to start drama or anything, but Emma wasn't exactly fair to you. She's been hanging out with Nate for a while now. I thought you knew." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Yeah, I know about Nate," I said, my voice flat. Megan gave me a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to say you're a good guy, and you didn't deserve that." I forced a smile and thanked her before walking away, but inside, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Hearing it from someone else made it feel more real, more final. Whatever I'd been holding on to, the hope that maybe Emma had just made a mistake, that maybe we could fix things, it disappeared in that moment. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us on my phone. There were so many pictures of us smiling, laughing, looking happy, but as I stared at them, I realized I couldn't remember the last time we'd felt that way. The cracks in our relationship had been there long before Nate came into the picture. Maybe I'd just been too blind, or too scared, to see them. That realization didn't make it hurt any less, but it gave me some clarity. Emma and I had been drifting apart for a long time, and we'd both made mistakes. She'd chosen to turn to someone else instead of confronting the problems we had, and that was on her. But I wasn't blameless either. I'd been so focused on work, so caught up in providing for us, that I'd stopped being present. I'd let the day-to-day grind take over, and somewhere along the way, we lost what made us us. A week later, Emma texted me. It was the first time I'd heard from her since she left. "Hey," the message read. "I was wondering if I could come by and pick up the rest of my stuff." My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. It was a simple request, but it felt like a final nail in the coffin of our relationship. "Sure," I replied after a few minutes. "Let me know when, and I'll make sure I'm not home." She responded quickly. "Thanks. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon." The next day, I packed up everything that was hers: clothes, books, little knickknacks she'd left behind. I piled the boxes by the door and left before she arrived. I didn't want to see her again. I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much this was still affecting me. When I got back later that evening, the boxes were gone, and so was any trace of her. The apartment felt emptier than ever, but for the first time, I felt like I could start to move forward. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't painless, but it was a step. I didn't know what my future looked like without Emma, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. And as hard as it was, I decided to choose myself. The weeks after Emma picked up her things were quieter, almost eerily so. For the first time in years, the apartment was entirely mine. No more reminders of her tucked into the corners of my life. No more late-night silences filled with tension or stolen glances that told me we were falling apart. It was just me now, alone with my thoughts. At first, it was suffocating. I'd come home from work and sit in the stillness, the kind of silence that seems to amplify every doubt, every regret. I thought about Emma constantly, not just the way things ended but everything leading up to it. The good times, the bad times, the moments where I should have seen the cracks forming but didn't. The blame shifted in my mind like a pendulum. Some days I blamed her for giving up on us, for lying, for letting someone else into our lives. Other days, I blamed myself for being too distracted, too focused on work, too blind to see what she needed until it was too late. But slowly, the silence started to feel less oppressive. I found myself taking small steps to reclaim my life. I started running again in the mornings, just a couple of miles at first, but enough to remind me of the clarity that comes with pushing your body forward, step by step. I went to the bookstore and picked up a few novels, the kind I used to love before life got so busy. I even bought a new plant, a small fern, that sat on the windowsill in the spot where Emma's favorite candle used to be. It was a little thing, but it felt symbolic. One night, about a month after Emma had left, I went out with a group of friends. They'd been trying to get me out of the house for weeks, but I'd always made some excuse about work or being too tired. This time, though, I said yes. I wasn't sure if I was ready to be around people again, but I knew I couldn't keep hiding from the world forever. We ended up at a bar downtown, one of those places with loud music, dim lighting, and overpriced cocktails. It wasn't really my scene, but it felt good to be out, surrounded by people who weren't Emma and who didn't know her. For a few hours, I let myself get lost in the noise, the laughter, the simple joy of being around friends. At one point, I stepped outside to get some air. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief after the stuffy heat of the bar. As I stood there, leaning against the brick wall, I noticed someone standing a few feet away, scrolling on their phone. She looked up and caught my eye, offering a small smile. "Busy night in there, huh?" she said, nodding toward the bar. "Yeah," I replied, smiling back. "A little too busy for me, honestly." She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that made me relax a little. "Same. I only came because my friends dragged me out. They said I needed to rejoin society." "Sounds familiar," I said, chuckling. "They're probably right, though." She tilted her head, studying me for a moment. "Let me guess, bad breakup?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I've been there," she said with a shrug. I recognized the look. "Like you're here physically but not quite mentally." "Yeah," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "Something like that." We talked for a while after that, about nothing and everything all at once. Her name was Rachel, and she was funny in a way that felt effortless, like she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She told me about her job at a nonprofit, her cat that hated everyone except her, and how she'd spent the past year rebuilding her life after her own messy breakup. I found myself opening up more than I expected, telling her bits and pieces about Emma and what had happened. By the time I went back inside to rejoin my friends, I felt lighter somehow. Rachel wasn't a miracle cure for the pain I was carrying, but talking to her reminded me that there was life beyond the mess Emma and I had made. It was a small moment, but it stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I kept focusing on myself. I didn't rush to date anyone or fill the void Emma had left. I wanted to take my time to figure out who I was outside of that relationship. I went hiking on weekends, explored new coffee shops, and even signed up for a photography class, a hobby I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. Every now and then, I'd think about Emma. I wondered what she was doing, if she was still with Nate, if she ever thought about me. But those thoughts came less often as time went on. They didn't sting the way they used to. They felt more like echoes of something that had happened a long time ago, something that no longer defined me. One evening, I got a message from Megan. Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up? I thought about how to respond for a moment before typing back. I'm doing okay. Better. Actually, thanks for asking. And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just saying it to convince myself. I really was better. I still had a long way to go, but I was finally starting to feel like I was moving forward. And that, I realized, was enough. About 6 months after Emma left, my life felt completely different. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when I thought about her or caught myself wondering if things could have gone differently. But for the most part, I was moving forward. I wasn't stuck in the loop of doubt or anger anymore, and that in itself felt like a victory. One evening, as I was walking back from the photography class I'd been taking, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hey, it's Emma. Can we talk? I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, the noise of the city buzzing around me. My first instinct was to delete the message and move on. What was there left to talk about? But something made me pause. I typed back a quick response. What's this about? She replied almost immediately. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I've been thinking about everything, and I wanted to apologize. For real this time. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. What did she expect me to say? That it was fine? That I'd forgiven her? I didn't owe her anything, but after a minute, I typed back, fine. I can meet tomorrow. 1 hour. We met at a coffee shop the next evening, a different one from where we used to go. I didn't want to risk the nostalgia. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window, stirring a cup of tea. She looked the same but different, like she'd been through her own version of hell and back. Thanks for coming, she said softly as I sat down. I'm not here for long, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. What do you need to say? She flinched slightly but nodded. I deserve that. She paused, fidgeting with her spoon. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For lying. For Nate. For how I handled us. I know I hurt you, and I can't take that back. But I've spent the last few months thinking about it, and I needed to tell you that I was wrong. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge how genuine she was. Why now? She sighed, looking down at her tea. Because I've been trying to move on, and I realized I couldn't without owning up to what I did. I wasn't fair to you. I let my insecurities and my selfishness ruin something good. I'm not here to ask for anything. I needed to tell you I'm sorry. I leaned back in my chair, the tightness in my chest loosening slightly. I appreciate the apology, I said finally, but you need to understand that it doesn't change what happened. You hurt me, Emma. You broke my trust, and that's not something you can just fix with an apology. I know, she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I nodded, letting her words sink in. For the first time, I felt like I could let go of the anger I'd been carrying. Not for her, but for me. Well, you've said what you needed to say, I said, standing up. I hope you figure things out, Emma, but I'm done looking back. Take care of yourself. She didn't stop me as I walked away, and for that, I was grateful. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me, and I took a deep breath. For the first time since everything happened, I felt free. Emma was a part of my past, but that's all she was now, a memory. I'd learned from it, grown from it, and now I was ready to move forward for good. That night, I deleted her number for the last time and went to bed with a strange but welcome feeling. Peace. I didn't need her apology to heal, but hearing it reminded me of how far I'd come. The future was mine again, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see what came next.